It's our first anniversary. We're celebrating that tonight. As it is a special event, we've asked a special friend to speak to us tonight. To many of us, he's an old friend, and hopefully after this evening, to many, he will be a new friend. Usually the Kips Bay Group is a closed meeting of AA, but due to tonight's special celebration, we are making an exception and having an open meeting to families and friends. Our only request is that guests respect the wishes of the group, and those wishes are what you hear here tonight, take it home with you. Who you see here tonight, leave that here. Anonymity is the spiritual backbone of our program. And again, please help us maintain this. Now, before I introduce our speaker, I'll read a statement from the foreword of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees, no dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Now, with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker. He has been called the greatest social architect of our century, and his greatest invention, the 12-step program, is America's greatest invention. His extraordinary energy were a major contribution to the success of this fellowship, and without his contributions, probably we would not be here tonight, and I don't know where the hell I would be. Please help me in welcoming the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Mr. Bill W.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm late. I apologize. Some of you in the hall might be aware of the news that we received earlier today. Came as quite a blow. I still can't get over it. Dr. Bob, my partner these last 15 years, died today at the Akron Hospital. I've been frantically trying to get a flight from Idlewild to Akron, but with this Korean War going on, we're not having any luck at all. Lois, my wife, right now is trying to get us on the night train to Cleveland. We'll drive down to Akron in the morning. So they said, I was very upset. I wasn't going to show up, but Lois said I needed a meeting, so I'm here. And thank you for coming. It's been very upsetting, but this group is celebrating its first anniversary, and I want to congratulate you. The great effort. You've done a lot of good. And I want to thank your family members that are present for their support in this wholesale miracle that we call AA. And take a moment, if we would, for a silent reflection and perhaps offer up a little prayer for Dr. Bob and his two kids. Let's just take a moment to do that. Thank you. Now, we don't make speeches in AA, we just tell stories. I had called Father Ed Dowling, a friend of mine down in St. Louis, friend of ours. I told him what was going on, and he said, why don't you not tell your story tonight? Why don't you tell them our story? Why don't you talk about Bob? Have an Irish wake. Tell lies about each other. And I thought about that. I haven't told our story in a long time. So if I make some mistakes, some of the fellows there that were at the beginning, they can correct me after the meeting, if you dare. But I'll do my best. My story by itself used to be called a bedtime story, put people to sleep, so maybe you're getting a break tonight. But unfortunately, it all began with something that happened to me 15 years ago. I was a patient, 16 years ago, 1934. I was a patient up in Charlie Towns' hospital up on Central Park West. I'd been there before. This was my fourth visit that year, the third time that summer. I was upstairs in my room. They just unwrapped me from a pair of those canvas pajama tops that they give to the excitables for the first day or so, and I'm flexing my muscles for the first time in a couple of days and going over some information that my doctor, Dr. Silkworth, had laid on me, and it was pretty shocking. And while I'm thinking it over, for lack of a better word, he's downstairs in his office talking to Lois, and he's telling her what he just finished telling me. And that was that my drinking, which at one time had only been a habit, had finally developed into an obsession. And about the time that that occurred, my body began to develop an allergy for the very substance that I craved. It was beginning to break the body down. He said I had a disease, hard to understand, harder to treat, but a disease nevertheless. And there was absolutely no cure for it. And it was his earnest suggestion that she commit me to the Rockland State Hospital as a chronic inebriate, which you could do that, for an extended period of time, perhaps for the rest of my life. And Lois, she was devastated. Even though years of my drinking, she was devastated with this news. And she said the only thing that I was afraid to ask the doctor when he told me, she said, well, why doesn't he just stop drinking? You never met a fellow like Bill. Whenever he wants to make up his mind to do something, he can do anything. And Silky, that's what we call Dr. Silkberg, Silky said to her, well, he can't. He can't for a while. Don't get me wrong. He said you can stop for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months. But eventually he'll be overtaken with this obsession that maybe this time it'll be different. And of course he'll pick up a drink and Katie bar the door. It'll just get worse. No, my dear, he's going to harm himself or die from this disease. And I had thought about harming myself, believe me. Well, I'm upstairs, as I said, going over this information. Pretty startling. And instead of thinking about that, I began to think about how did I catch this disease? How do you catch alcohol? You know. And I came up with two thoughts, for lack of a better word. One was absolutely idiotic, but I'll share it with you. That was the circumstances of my birth. I thought about this quite a bit that night. I was born behind a bar. The bar in my grandmother's hotel bar up in Vermont, East Dorset, Vermont. A room right behind the door. That's what I was brought into the world. And I thought, you know, maybe some liquor spilled on me at the birth scene and I sort of boxed my compass and I had to follow that direction. And I thought about this, you know, idiotic. My father drank. That was one of the reasons why he up and deserted myself, my mother, and my sister and went off to Western Canada. He was a quarrier. And he went to work for the quarries there and just abandoned us. We were living at the time in Rutland, about 100 miles north of where I was born, East Dorset. So Mom had to come back home and move in with her parents, the Griffiths, but lived across the street from where the bar was, my grandmother's hotel. So within a year, after the divorce came through, and it was pretty quick because of the circumstances and some other reasons, Mom left, went off to Boston to study medicine to become a physician. So at the age of now 9, I was abandoned by both alcohol and drugs. And I got the idea in my head that they didn't leave each other. They left me. They divorced me. There was something about me that wasn't right. And I took it to heart. I really did. And I became kind of a reclusive kid, gawky, easily pushed around by kids half my size. I wouldn't defend myself because I felt I wasn't worth it. Now, Grandpap, my grandfather, he had had a son who died at an early age, and he saw in me a second opportunity to present a boy into manhood. And when he got this realization of how I was thinking about myself, he began to work against that, little by little, trying to cut me down into a better attitude about myself. And then one day, my 12th birthday, Grandpap gave me a book on Australia. And in handing me the book, he just said, very matter-of-factly, he said, you know, Willie, the Aborigine, the Australian bushman, is the only guy that can make a return boomerang. And I, right away, a little 5-watt bulb went off in the back of my head, and I said, well, I'll make a boomerang. I'll get in the record books. I'll be the first Yankee boomerang. Now, some kids will live with an ideal for that, maybe a couple of weeks, month. Me, it became a power drive that lasted for the next 6 months. I worked on every conceivable piece of wood I could lay my hands on. Read every book that was available in the town library on aerodynamics. 12-year-old kid studying aerodynamics. The librarian sent up to Burlington to get more books from me. I read everything I could, but nothing worked. I'd fashion it, plane it, wax it, and throw it, and hit the ground like a rock. Nothing worked at all. Then finally, out of just sheer desperation, I stole the headboard from my own bed, brought it out back where we had a workshop, and right out of the center, I cut out what I thought a boomerang would look like. And I worked on that for a couple of days. And then one morning, when nobody was up and about, I came out of the house, and across the way was a church. And I took that hunk of wood, and I flung it at the church, and it went out and up, and about an inch or two away from the stained glass window, it turned around and came back. I had done it. Well, I ran into the house, and I raised Grandpap. I said, come on, I want to show you something. He threw some pants over his pajamas and came out standing barefoot on the lawn. I took that piece of wood again, and I flung it at the church, and it went out and up, and again, just missed that stained glass window. Came back, nearly took the back of his head off. But I had done it again. He wasn't upset at all. He was absolutely ecstatic. And he took me by the hand, and that morning he walked me all over that little town. And anybody that was on the road that morning got to hear about Willie and the Boomerang. And all the while saying, this is a number one man, a number one man. And it was the happiest, the most joyous day of my life. Little realizing, though, that I was setting up an emotional boomerang that was going to follow me from then on. And that was the need, the absolute need to be number one. To be the best, the first in everything I did. I didn't play the fiddle in the school band. I was the leader of the band. I didn't pitch a baseball. I was the captain of the team. I didn't just go to school. I was president of the student body. Dated the prettiest girl in town. Everything had to be the best, the most, and the first. Well, I finally made it. Here I am years later. I am now a number one alcoholic, and they're going to lock me up and throw the key away. Well, I didn't come to any conclusions, and the next morning when Lois came up to see me, I begged her, pleaded with her not to follow the doctor's advice and lock me up. Give me one more chance. And God bless her, when my cure was up, which usually lasted 3 to 5 days, she came and collected me. And she brought me home. Now, our home in 1934 wasn't our home. We were living over in Brooklyn Heights at her homestead where she was born and raised. Her brother-in-law, a doctor, owned the mortgage on the place. And he allowed us to live rent-free. I was unemployable. Where at one time on Wall Street, I was at the top of my profession, what with the crash in 29, and then my subsequent hospitalizations in every sanitarium on the East Coast and Lower Canada. We were stony broke. Lois had a job in a downtown Brooklyn department store making $22 a week as an interior decorator. That was our total income. And together, we locked me into this house. I dare not go out for the next 2 months, beginning with pacing throughout the house, day in and day out, fighting off the delayed hallucinations, we call them the whiskey fits, the stomach diarrhea, the shakes, the sweats, the inability to sleep, the whole nightmare of recovering on your own, all alone, with no support at all. Well, finally, after 2 months, I was sober. Stark raving sober, but I was sober. And one morning, making breakfast for Lois before she went off to work in our kitchen, I happened to look out the window and realized that the weather was perfect. It was Armistice Day, November 11, 1934. And I had to get out of that house. I mean, I was bursting at the seams with energy. I had to get some exercise. I said, honey, I'm going to go play golf. I had access to a club over in Staten Island. My brother-in-law, the doctor, he was a member. I played, he paid. I'm going to go play golf. She tried to talk me out of it. She said, wait till the springtime. I said, no, I got to get out. This is probably the last good day before the winter comes. She finally agreed because I had sober 2 months, the longest period in years. She relented. She gave me a couple of dollars. Should I have some expenses? She went off to work. I climbed up to the attic. I got my clubs, changed my clothes, and actually walked down the hill from Brooklyn Heights to the Staten Island Ferry. Stood out on the deck in the middle of the New York Harbor in the middle of November. It was that lovely a day. Full of, juice. I was absolutely vibrant. Alive for the first time in years. Now, on the opposite shore, we needed to board a bus to take us the 8 or 10 miles to the country club. And climbing on board, I spot a fella carrying a rifle. Now, I don't know about you, but in New York, you see a guy with a gun, you want to keep an eye on him. So I sat right behind him. And as If he made a motion with that rifle, I'd have a club out of the bag in a minute and I'd dust him off. Well, he didn't make any motion at all. We went a couple of stops and I became curious and I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, "Hey, pal, where are you going with the gun?" And as it turned out, he was going to a shooting match at a gun club next door to the golf course that I was going to play on. What a small world. Now I'm from Vermont and I hunted all my life, but figured I knew everything there was about guns, and this was a captive. He wasn't going anywhere. So I applied that knowledge to him. Very receptive. He listened to every word I had to say. And then he began to tell me what he knew about rifles. Would you believe it? He knew more than I did. And I couldn't suffer that. Not me. And having been in the artillery during the First World War, I decided to talk about some really big guns. And velocity and trajectory and calibration. Before you know it, I'm number one in the conversation. And I'm beginning to get that juice back, that good feeling of being in control. When all of a sudden, the bus gets hit by a taxi cab. Went smack into the back of the bus. We climbed off, we checked the damage. Wasn't much, but it was sufficient for the driver to have to call to the garage for a replacement bus. It was still several miles from the country club. They also made arrangements to get a bus and call the police. And we waited. While waiting, I decided to practice my putting. Standing on the sidewalk that beautiful day, I'm practicing my putting. Next to a fellow standing next to me, sighting his rifle. And it dawns on me, this is absolutely absurd. Anybody driving by, where could these two nuts be going? One guy with a gun, the other guy with a golf club. And although I didn't mind being prominent, I didn't like to look stupid. And this was absolutely a stupid-looking situation. So I said to my companion, I said, don't we look silly? He said, "You ain't kidding. We're like two jerks." He said, "There's a bar across the street. Let's go over and we'll have a couple of drinks. I'll tell the driver where we're at. When the new bus arrives, we'll continue." Okay by me, so we cross over. We get to the bar. It had been a former speakeasy. I remembered it before. Now it was a bar. We were the only customers. And we sat up at the bar, and he had a highball, a whiskey and ginger ale. And they said, "What of me?" And I said, "Just a glass of ginger ale, thank you." And when he left, my companion turned to me and said, "You don't drink?" I go, "Oh, no, sir, you kidding me?" And then, for whatever reason, ego, I'm sure, I decided to tell this poor guy my life history with alcohol. Drop by drop, drunk by drunk, no, you name it. He listened. And when I finished, he said something that indicated to me that he was a pretty smart fellow. He said, "Pal, you're remarkable." And that was the nicest thing anybody had to say about me in years. So I figured I had to be smart to know that. But I wouldn't leave it alone. I said, "What do you mean, remarkable?" He said, "Well, I know a lot of guys like you, and they're gone. They're dead, living in jail, living in the weeds, they're on work farms, or in the army, wherever they could stick it. But you seem to have gotten hold of yourself. You're truly remarkable." He said it twice. I wanted to kiss him. I needed that affirmation. I truly did. Well, the new bus arrived, and we got on board. I didn't want to let him go. I needed what he was saying to me, so I made a suggestion. I said, "Sir, what time do you start playing golf, start shooting?" He said, 2 o'clock. I didn't tee off till 1:30. It was now just going on 12. I said, "Well, why don't you join me at my club?" Forget my brother. Come to my club for some lunch. And as it turned out, when the lunch was over, there were some French doors. You go out the French doors, cross a field, he'd be shooting in 5 minutes. They said, "Fine, that'd be all right with me." So we both got off the bus at my stop, walked into the country club. We're crossing over to the dining room when there's a little bit of a manager from front up and says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "No, we're going in for some lunch." He said, "Oh, fella, I'm sorry, the dining room is closed." We gave the staff the day off for Armistice Day. We had no idea that we'd have weather like this, or else we would stay over. We're not serving lunch today, nor supper. But we can, if you don't mind, we can prepare a sandwich for you in the club bar. The bar is open. And my companion said, "Are you sure that's not going to bother you?" I said, "No, you witness down the road. I know the bar." So we entered this bar. And again, the only customers. We sat at the bar. Again, you had a highball. I had a ginger ale. I think they made turkey club sandwiches. No, Turkey Club ceremony. And my friend, who was getting smarter by the minute, turned to me and said, "You know, pal, you're fantastic." Wow, from remarkable to fantastic. I said, again, I wouldn't leave him alone. "What do you mean, fantastic?" He said, "Here you are in an ocean of alcohol, and you're saying no to it." And he was right. Where we were sitting at the bar, with the curved mirrors, and the row after row of every size, shape, color bottle of liquor, it was like we were sitting in a sea of booze, and I was saying no. No alcoholic could ever pass a test like that, I was sure. And when I got home that night, I'm going to call my wife and give her a piece of my mind. I'm going to call my doctor, and give him a piece of mind for scaring the both of us to hell and beyond. I'm going to tell him off. Well, we ate our sandwiches, drank our drinks, and even made arrangements, he and I, to meet in the city the following week to discuss a business opportunity. And I was back being mainstream the first day out of the house. Wait till I tell Lois. Finally, the time came to leave. I signaled to the bartender to give me a check so I could sign it so my brother-in-law wouldn't have a problem paying for it. And I gave a nice generous tip. We were gathering up our belongings when the bartender came back. In his hands were two mixed drinks, two highballs. He said, "Here, gentlemen, these drinks are on the house in celebration of Armistice Day." Without a moment's hesitation, I reached over, I picked up the drink, and I drank it down. Then turning to my future business partner, well, he wasn't smart looking anymore, take my word. He had the dumbest expression I've ever seen on him. His mouth agape. He was stunned. He said, "Mister, you gotta be crazy. After what you told me that stuff has done to you and yours, you gotta be insane to have drank that." And you know, the only thing my pride had me left to say was, "Oh, didn't I tell you that? Did I forget to tell you that? I am crazy. I am insane. I am." My wife found me in the areaway between the inside door and the outside door of the house back in Brooklyn. How I got home, I have no idea. But I had fallen in the vestibule, cut my forehead, peed my pants, still clutching that unused bag of golf. That's how she found me. And the next morning when I woke up, realized what had happened, I knew that I was an alcoholic. That I'd be one for the rest of my life, and when they pulled the grass over my head, I'd be a dead alcoholic, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about that. But I also knew that I'd be damned before I die in some lunatic asylum, not me, not Bill Wilson. And that morning, I made up my mind to drink myself to death, or perhaps get the Dutch courage to take my life. I tried it before and always backed off at the last minute. There was no going back. It was this or an insane asylum. And from that day on, I begged, borrowed, and to my eternal shame, stole the $1 it took to get 3 pints of bathtub gin brought around to my back door by my mother. Stole from my wife's purse. Sitting in my kitchen, drinking myself off the planet every day, writing angry letters to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, of all people, telling what a lousy job he was doing. Letters, by the way, he never replied to, which is typical for a Democrat, but that's another meeting. I won't go into it here. It was over. My life was over. I could care less what had happened. Lois gave up on me. Where I fell down is where I woke up in the morning. She went on with her life without me being present. It was over. Then one morning, I hadn't started to drink yet. I was too sick from the night before. I got a phone call. "Hey, Bill, it's Ebby. Can I come over to see you?" And my heart soared. My old drinking pal. Hadn't seen him in a long time. Wow, I hated to drink alone. "Come on over, Ebby. We'll have a party." He and I have been on so many drunks together. We can reminisce for hours. So I'll be right there. And then I did something heroic for a man of my nature. I took out of hiding the 1 pint of gin that I kept in the downstairs bathroom behind the toilet for emergency. Nothing in the house. I scrounged around the cupboards in the kitchen to find something to cut it with because he could never drink that stuff straight. He had a sour stomach. I found a can of pineapple juice. And while I'm stirring this slop, I remembered something that my wife had told me about Ebby. She wasn't a fan of his, but apparently she heard that he had had a motor accident a while back. He had driven his car into somebody's kitchen up north where he was from. And he rolled the window down and the wreck. There was a lady doing dishes by the sink, and he said, "Hey, lady, can you get me a cup of coffee?" The first drive-in experience I ever heard of was Ebby in his car accident. I got to ask him about that because his family was political up in Albany, in that part of the country, and in my town of Manchester, East Dorset, Vermont. I got to ask him, how did he get out of that mess? That's a doozy. When I was along the way, there was a knock on the door, and I opened it up, and I took one look at him, and I knew he had changed. Immediately, I knew something had changed in this guy. Well, first of all, he was clean. And what I mean clean is had it been blocked, his suit sponged and pressed, had a shirt and tie on, shoes polished, clean shaven, clear-eyed. Now, my costume for the period, there were enough mirrors in that house that I could always see myself, was an old, torn undershirt, some baggy trousers, house slippers, a size and a half too big, so you couldn't walk in them, or you'd walk out of them. I had a shuffle whenever I moved around. Lois used to say I loved it when he wore them in the kitchen. He polished the linoleum going back and forth with those slippers on. That's how I looked. Didn't shave, didn't bathe. I wasn't going anywhere. It was finished. Well, we shared some pleasantries in the parlor, and then I suggested we go back to the kitchen where it was warmer, where the booze was. And he followed me. We sat down together, him here and me there. We're shooting the breeze, and then finally I'm getting a little thirsty. The back of my throat was parched, so I reached for the pitcher of cocktail, I guess you call it. Slop, I call it today. But anyway, I began to pour it, and he reached over and he grabbed my wrist and he said, "No, thanks." "You don't want to drink?" He said, "No, I'm not drinking today." Wow, I had never, ever seen him turn down a drink. So I asked, I said, "What's gotten into you?" "Well, Bill, I guess you could say I got religion." Oh, my God. I've let a religious nut. That's the change. This guy is a religious nut. I'm going to have to listen to some rantings and ravings. Then I realized, wait a minute, he didn't bring a jug with him, so this was all mine. I don't care about the pineapple juice. So I poured myself a drink. I drank it down. And my mother said, always be polite to a guest in your house. So I said to him, "Okay, pal, what kind of religion have you got?" He said, "Bill, I guess you could say I got the religion of common sense." I struggled a bit. I never heard of Our Lady of a Common Sense. What are you talking about, common sense? He said, "Bill, I don't know if you realize how much of a hold liquor had on me." I did my best act. I said, "You, Ebby, why, I had no idea." I think it was worse than I was. And then I realized when I said that, I can't ask him about Albany. What happened up there? You know, I have to let it go because that will tip him off. I know he's a drunk. They say, "Oh, yeah, Bill." I was in judge's chambers up home. They were getting ready to send me to Brattleboro for an extended period. My family is fed up. But after hearing, friends of mine, they were friends of mine also, and a perfect stranger who was a stranger to me, came to my rescue. The stranger went up to the judge and said, "Your Honor, give him to us. We think we can straighten him out." They're members of this Oxford groups. Have you ever heard of them? And I had. I used to read the paper every day, drunk or sober. I read the paper from back to front. Nothing else to do in the house when you're locked in there. And every once in a while, usually in the society columns, you'd read about this bunch of swells over on Park Avenue, jerking people to Jesus under the name of the Oxford group. Well, I said, "I know all about them." He said, "Well, I know nothing about them." I knew nothing about them, but I've been with them now for almost 3 months, and I haven't had a drink. But what's more important, I haven't had the desire to have it. I took certain ideas peculiar to those people. I put it to work on my drinking problem, and it's doing the trick. "Well, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound." I said, "Well, I could always learn. What are the ideas?" You know, he said, "Well, number one, Bill, I had to get honest with myself for the first time in my life. Take a really good look at what booze was doing. Hey, the unexamined life is not worth living." I had no argument with that idea. He said, "Then, Bill," he said, "I had to share that with another person in strict confidence. I had to talk about that life with somebody else. Confession is good for the soul. No argument. Then, Bill," he said, "I had to begin a program of restitution, pay back what I owe, make up for the harm that I've done, make amends to my family. I'll be doing that the rest of my life, but I had to begin to do that." I try to remember if he owed me any money. Good time to remind him, hey, what about me, Bill? Well, he didn't. He's off the hook. Then Bill, he said, and this might upset you, I had to become willing to help people like myself find what I found. And that's why I'm here. I got through the grapevine that old Bill Wilson's going to hell in a handbasket over in Brooklyn. I asked my friends if I could go over and talk to him, and said, give it a shot. That's why I'm here. I hope you're not upset. And I said, I certainly am. You kidding me? You had no right to talk about me that way. Listen, this depression isn't going to last forever. I'll get back to Wall Street. I'll get on top again. Don't worry about me. I'm still married. I'm living in a nice house. I'll get back. I'll do fine. You have no right bringing me into that kind of a conversation. Okay, he said, I'm sorry. I'll leave. He said, but I got one other thing that they do that I have to pass on to you. And you got the full picture. I said, what's that? And he said, this is going to bother you more than anything I've said so far. So what is it? He said, I had to scrape up some God, some higher power to give me the help to do that. I had to ask God for help. I got up and I said, get out. Get out of my house, my brother-in-law's house. The idea of coming here and telling me about this, what a waste of a human being. Get out of here. And he left. I went back to drinking. So much for a pleasant afternoon. And drink I did for the next couple of days. But I developed another obsession. I became obsessed with the idea that he's sober and I'm still drunk. And if one of us is going to get sober, it should be me first. I'm first. I'm number one. And the obsession grew until finally I said, if I had cancer and Ebby came to me and said, there's some great physician over in New York to cure your cancer, I'd have fallen out of the house on my hands and knees. And I knew by then that I had a disease as deadly as cancer. And I wasn't doing anything about it. And that didn't make sense. So I thought, what I ought to do? I ought to check them out. My job on Wall Street was as a field investigator. I used to go out and inspect companies that were showing promise, write a report about it, come back and tell my Wall Street friends about it, and they'd put some money into their stock and they'd put some in for me. In the 20s, I made millions. Lost it all. It's all on paper, but I made millions. I was great at my job. If the companies were failing, I told my partners to get their money out. I was very good. Either way, I got paid, in or out. I'll use that experience and I'll investigate the option. Take what I want, leave the other stuff that I don't want for other yahoos, and I'll get sober. So when Lois came home that night, I told her about Eddie's visit a couple of days before, and she didn't like it. But when she heard that I was going to do something for myself to get better, she helped me out. She had bought a Brooks Brothers suit, a used Brooks Brothers suit. She had tailored for me. So the next morning, I think I took a bath. I know I shaved. Shined my shoes, got a starch collar on, put the suit on for the first time. I looked pretty good. And with her help, a couple of dollars in my pocket, she went off to work again. And I left Brooklyn for Manhattan to meet God. Now, took the subway over. I made my first mistake that day. And I'm used to making mistakes. But I was on the west side of Manhattan instead of the east side where the Calvary Mission was, Sam Shoemaker's Calvary Mission, where they held mission for drunks like me and people off the Bowery and off the gutter. I'm on the west side of the island, and they're already on the east side, which is the widest part of the island. So I'm about ready to go downstairs into the subway again and take a shuttle across on 42nd Street and then south again on 4th. But I said, wait a minute, it's not too cold. I need some exercise. And it's early. And when you're meeting God for the first time, you don't want to come in early because you give them the wrong impression. You sound kind of anxious. So, maybe even a few minutes fashionably late. I'll walk across town. And I started to walk. And I got a couple of blocks. I have to give myself credit. Then I started looking along some of the saloons along the way to see if there's anybody in there that I could kill some time. There wasn't. Finally, a block and a half away from the Mission, I crossed to the north side of 23rd Street to look into one of my favorite haunts. But they had a steam table. They were cooking hot dogs in the window. And it steamed up the window, so you couldn't look in. So I went in. And I looked around. There wasn't anybody there. And I figured, well, it's early. I'll wait. Somebody's bound to show up because they've been there a number of times. So I sat at the bar. And I don't know about you, but to be polite, I had a glass of beer. I'm not a beer drinker, but I had a glass of beer. Nobody showed up, I had another glass of beer. Nobody showed up, another glass of beer and a shooter to go with the beer. And then after a while, just another shooter, another shooter, another shooter. And as was my custom, I went into a blackout, forgetting any plans for an evening that hadn't even begun yet. So much for meeting God. And then about an hour later, as was my custom, I came out of the blackout, and I found myself talking to a fellow who I thought at first was from Russia. But it turned out to be from Finland. Alex the Finn, some of you might remember, he went home after the war. And I'm trying to figure out, what am I doing with my new used Brooks Brothers suit in New York with money in my pocket, talking to a Finn who happened to be a sailmaker on a fishing boat. What am I doing in Manhattan talking to a fisherman? And a little 5-watt bulb that I got in the back of my head, that went off again. I said, you're in town to talk to fishers of men, not a fisherman. I remembered the mission. I said to him, come on, I'll introduce you to God. He tagged along because I still had a couple of bucks. We got to the mission. Tex Francisco was at the door, God rest his soul. And he barred us. We were both obviously drunk. And push was coming to shove. I was getting ready for one of my usual beatings when Ebby shows up. He sized up the situation. He said, hey, I'll sponsor these guys. I'll sit on them. They act up, we'll scoop, and they'll be out of the room in a matter of seconds. Tex allowed us, okay by him. And I got into my first mission meeting. I'll tell you this, the stink in that room will go to my grave. The absolute raw stench of those men sitting row after row after row on benches. Vomit soaked, urine soaked, wine soaked. Their body weight still an integral part of their body. I mean, he puts me right smack in the middle of this crowd of bums. My new used Brooks Brothers suit. Lois will never get the stink out of it. And he says to both of us, sit here, shut up, I'll be right back. And up front they had these big, gigantic pots being boiling. And the coffee makers, that wasn't coffee, it was the chicory. Ersatz coffee, and a mountain of white bread. And he takes 2 tin plates and he throws some beans and throws the bread on top, fills up the cups with the chicken, he brings it back, shoves it under my nose and said, eat this, will make you feel better. How I didn't vomit in the plate, I have no idea. But I started to nibble and I discovered that I was ravenous, absolutely ravenous. And before you know it, I'm wiping the plate clean with the piece of the bread that's left. Finish the coffee and I'm handing it up and I'm extolling to everybody. This is the greatest meal I've ever gotten in my life. And they're going, shh, the meeting's going on. Shh, be quiet, be quiet. No? What a great place. And as kids say today, I began to mellow out to the room and I went into another blackout. But what happened to me later on was related to me the next morning by Ebby back in Brooklyn. But it seems that night, somewhere during the meeting, I stood up, grabbed the Finn by the back of the neck, we came forward and accepted Christ. Next thing you know, I'm jerking them to Jesus with some old camp songs from my childhood from the Chautauqua that my grandfather used to bring me to. And they're clapping for me, and I'm clapping for them. We're all on the glory road. And I'm gonzo. I'm completely obliterated. When he told me that, I knew I could never go back to Manhattan again. Just the idea of some drunk coming and saying, boy, you were great at the mission the other night. I'd have died of shame. I didn't believe a word of that stuff. Here I was, screaming to high heaven. Oh, I knew then that I was psychotic, and they're going to throw a net over me, and they're going to bring me to the booby hatch, and my life is over. I can't go out of here again. Well, all Ebby says, you had me fooled. I thought you had the message. I thought it was there, but hey, call me if you need me. Lois had already left, absolutely furious at the way I came home, and I went to meet God and come back drunker than ever been. And I'm now really in a deep depression, morbid, absolutely morbid. I'm walking around the house, and I realized, though, after a while, something happened that morning that had never happened before in all the years I was married. I came home, or that morning when Lois was going to work, I returned money to her that I hadn't spent the night before. And if you knew me and my drinking, I never came home with money. I couldn't go buy a bar when I was drinking if I had a dime in my pocket. I had to spend it. I came home only for money. something happened at that meeting that changed that. And I said, wow, if they can do that for you drunk, imagine what they can do for you sober. That's it. I'll get sober. And I'll check them out again. Getting sober was very simple. Charlie Towns' hospital, 3 to 5 days. My brother-in-law always paid the bill. I'll go over to Charlie's, get sober, and then go check the oxygen. So I got dressed and I headed out from Manhattan again. But this time, I realized, if you're going to get sober, you should get drunk first. I mean, no sense going into that place with a hangover. It's wasting a lot of money. If I didn't have any money, I had given it all back to my wife. I had a nickel and a penny. Needed a nickel for the subway, and you couldn't get drunk in Brooklyn, 1934, on a penny. 2 cents maybe, but not a penny. So I mooshed around Brooklyn Heights, get some credit, and actually was on Lois's tick. I got 3 quarts of beer. Drank one right away. Tried to give one away to a guy on the subway. He wouldn't take it. I finished that. That left me with the one bottle, staggering into Towns' hospital. I spot Silky talking to a nurse in the lobby, and I say, "Hey, Doc, I found the cure." I'm talking about the oxygen group. He sees the bottle of beer in my hand. He says, "I see you have, Bill. Go to your room. I'll talk to you later." So I went up, got undressed in my room. I'd been in that joint so often, I kind of had my own room. Got undressed, finished the beer, went to bed. Now, 3 days later, I'm still in that bed, free of alcohol, free of sedatives, full of remorse, self-pity, self-hatred, anger, resentment, fear, the whole gamut. Become awfully drunk. Realizing now, sober, I have no intention of checking out the oxygen. I don't believe a word of that stuff. Now, this is my state of mind, really depressed. When I look up and standing in the doorway is Eddie, and I said, wow, here's a guy that practices what he preaches. I'd heard the nurses giving a report that afternoon talking about how cold it was outside. It was snowing. And here's that guy come out of that cold and out of that snow. And wow. He came over the bed. He looked down at me and he said, "Gee, pal, I'm sorry to see you back in this joint. I thought you had it the other day, but hey, if there's anything I can do for you, give me a call. I'll come right over." And he turned to go, and I said, "Wait a minute, pal. What's that neat little formula you've got that you've been using that keeps you sober?" "Oh, it's simple. You get honest, you talk it over with somebody else, make up for the harm you've done, try to help other people, and ask whatever God you can scrape up with the strength to do that." I mentioned the God word. I said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot. I still gagged. Thanks. Hit the road. I don't need it." And he left. Now, they used to leave you alone in that joint. You don't bother them, they're not going to bother you. My room was around the corner from the nurse's station. I wasn't in the community. I was by myself in my room. And I'm laying there in this hospital room, realizing again that I've done a terrible thing. Gotten drunk, broken everybody's heart. And I started to sink into a depression, which again, I'm no stranger to all my life. And I thought of all the broken vows, the broken promises, and the missed opportunities, the shattered dreams, the history of sanitariums and hospitals, sick, vomiting, coming home naked. Absolute horror of my life. Didn't help. I kept sinking into this damn depression, no matter how self-honesty I practiced, how much self-honesty I practiced. It was over. But then it got so bad, I found myself at the bottom of a pit in my mind, a deep, dark pit, and I couldn't get out. Couldn't get out. And I know then it's the cause of what that alcohol had done to me. But had I not already done it, I would have sold my soul at that moment. Absolutely. But instead, I cried out, "If there is a God, let him show himself to me right now. I will do anything, anything." And the room I was in lit up in an intense white light, and I got caught up in an ecstasy that even today I can't describe. In my mind's eye, it was like I was on a mountain, and a wind, not of air, but of spirit flowed through me. And it burst upon me instantly that I was a free man. The obsession to drink, the thought that preceded all thought in my mind left. Eventually, the light and the ecstasy subsided, And I found myself back in that hospital room in a different state of consciousness, just in absolute joy, absolute pure joy. And all I could say was, so this is the God of the preachers. This is what they've been talking about all the years that I didn't buy into. Now, I've got one of these inquiring rational minds. You know, I'm a curse. And I began to realize that I was undergoing a profound hallucination. That this was a slide into alcohol psychosis, into a wet brain, for lack of a better word. I was dying. And I became frightened. And I got up and I went out and I got the nurse to go get Dr. Silver. Bring the doctor, I have to talk to him. It was late, and she saw my anxiety, and she went and she walked me to a man. He came to my room in his bathrobe and pajamas. And earlier that afternoon, he had walked by my room without even saying hello. He lost the good nature of this man. He knew you were lost. He looked in, but he just kept walking. But he came again that night, and he sat alongside my bed, and as best I could, I described to him what I've just told you. And he listened. He didn't enter any conversation with me. He just listened to what I had to say. And finally, I don't know where I got the courage. I said, am I crazy? Am I truly insane? This is the end. He took for a, honest to God, from my point of view, it was an eternity. But finally, brow furrowed, you could see he was thinking. And he shook his head. He said, no, my boy. He says, I've never witnessed what you've described, but I've read about it in books. And it does sober up drunks. You better hang on to it. It's all you got. He said, I saw you this afternoon, and you broke my heart. I couldn't talk to him. I had to walk by. You were dead. But I could see something's happened to you. Hang on to it. It's all you got. You're not free. And he left, and I slept like a baby. And the next morning, Abby showed up, and I told him what had happened. And he said, I'll be right back. And he left. And within an hour, he came back with a book by Dr. William James, called The Variety of Religious Experiences. He said, read this, and you'll find out what happened to you last night. The toughest book I ever read in my life. I devoured it. And in it I found people like myself that had these sudden, illuminating experiences that altered the course of their life. 1 minute they're on the road to perdition, the next minute they're on the glory path. And his own experiences in that book. I said, wow, this is the scientific evidence. These people have these sudden, blinding, illuminating experiences that change them, conversion experiences. But then he went on to describe another variety of experience, which he called the educational variety, which is gradual. People undergo the same profound change, but over the period of time, in union with people like themselves, in a community like themselves. They undergo the same change. They get out of their negative life force into a positive life. And that's what happened to me. And all I can say is, but why? I wasn't deserving. I was a bum. Why did I get this break? What was it that Evie did or said that put me on the road to this place right now? And that's when I came up with an analogy, and I'll share it with you, and I hope you can identify. My drinking had so isolated me that I used to liken it to being inside a cave of loneliness and isolation. And for years, my wife, my mother, friends, fellow workers would come to the mouth of the cave and say, come on out. Come on. And I couldn't. I wanted to. There's no music in that cave. I wanted to get out, but I couldn't get out. And then one day, Evie showed up. But having been a captive in a similar cave, he didn't stand outside. He entered my cave. One ex-cave drum, showing a cave drum, a way to get out. That's when I made up my mind to go out and help ex-cave drum. That's why I'm here tonight. You cave drum, if you are still. I left the hospital, joined the Oscar group, came forth to save the world. In the next several months, 5 months, I talked to everybody in the 5 boroughs of New York. It got to the point that when they saw me coming, they ran the other way. See, I was believing that if you're going to get sober, you had to be on top of a mountain with this white flash, wind going through you, and they go like this. One guy asked me one day, what were you drinking the day you had your hot flash? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're a psychotic. Nobody got sober. So finally, I went to see Dr. Silpert, and I said, Silky, how come people, Debbie can help me, and I can't help anybody? And you know I'm better than you know who, I'm number one. Silky said, well, Bill, I've listened to you talk to our charity cases. We never turn you loose on a paying customer. I got one piece of advice. I said, what's that? Lay off the dog. What? Yeah, he said, don't talk dog. Talk drunk. Talk about alcohol. Talk about you. What you did. What happened to you. Tell them your story. And then once you get the connection, one drunk talking to another, share the spiritual life. But make the connection first. I left, started to work. People were listening to what I had to say. But nobody getting sober. Finally, friends of ours said, when are you going to quit that drunk business and get a job back on Wall Street and get his wife out of a department store? So I decided to give it up. I started to hang out on Wall Street, and I landed a deal going down in Akron, Ohio, and I cut myself in for a piece of the action. Now, before I go to Akron in 1935, let me stop for a few minutes so I can call my wife to find out if we can get there tonight. I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I know it well. Walk down there. Yeah, before I begin, though, I wanted to mention they talked about anonymity when I was listening to the introduction. And when I get a chance to come to a meeting like this, I like to address it for what it's worth. It's the spiritual foundation of our program, no question about it. But don't be too anonymous. Don't let it prevent you from helping another person, because you'll both be losers. You will. Take my word for it. Don't be as anonymous as the guy in my home group. He's so anonymous. His sponsor doesn't know he's in the program. I mean, this is how deep this guy is. So you don't want to get that deep. Akron in 1935 was a city divided unto itself. Headquarters of the three major tire companies, Goodyear, Goodrich, and Firestone. I went out with some investors to take over a small rubber machine company that did business with all three of those. We were going to do it by proxy, but it failed. Some outfit from Chicago came in, they had some inside information, they won. And I was really downcast. I mean, I had a lot bet on it. I was going to be made president of the new company. We got it. And my investors, they decided to go back to New York. I had nothing to go back to, no job. And I said, let me hang around. My bill at the Mayflower Hotel had been paid forward. Let me hang around here for a couple of days and see if there was any malfeasance or misfeasance, anything illegal done by the winning party. And we can sue them. So they said, if you want to hang out in this town, go right ahead. No skin off our nose. And that's how I found myself the day before Mother's Day, 1935, May of 1935, pacing up and down the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, waiting for Monday when the library opens. Didn't know a soul in town, not a soul. After a while, there was a bar at one end of the hotel up a few steps, and the desk clerk at the opposite end was about a block along the lobby. And after a while of pacing, I found myself standing outside of the bar. listening to the sounds that bars make, you know, the ice cubes, the jukebox, the cash register, the laughter. I mean, I was listening so hard I probably could have heard the smoke from the cigarettes. I was listening, and I said, you know, you have nothing to do with money. Why don't you go and have a glass of ginger ale? Strike up a conversation, kill some time. As soon as I said that, I remembered Staten Island. I said, ginger ale, your foot, you want to get drunk. And that scared me. I had $10 in my pocket. $10, 1935, king for a day. Believe me. So I got frightened and I went away from the bar and I began pacing and I said, if this can happen, I'm almost 6 months without a drink. What's going on? What's been keeping me sober? And that's what I realized. Working with drunks, trying to help them. And although I had no scalps on my belt, none of them got sober. It kept me sober. And I said, I don't need a drink. I need a drunk. I need him more than he needs me. Didn't know a soul in town. So I'm back to pacing. Couldn't go in the bar and ask them to beat me up. Went back to pacing. After a while, I found myself standing in the center of the lobby of the hotel, studying a church directory. And all of a sudden, down in the bottom right-hand corner, said the Reverend Walter Tunks. I said, I'll play this hunch. Growing up in Vermont, when we took a hike in the woods, we took a tunk. That's what we called it. I'll call this guy Tunks. A few boulders out here was a 10 strike. I got the #1 fan, a member too of the Oxford. All I said to him is, my name is Bill Wilson. I'm a rum hound from New York. I'd like to hook up with a drunk. I think he can help. Now, at first he thought I wanted to get drunk with him. He said, you know, I can take you guys on one at a time, but I'm not going to double team. When I explained to him what I wanted to do with the drunk, he said, well, that's pretty noble, but I can't help you. I don't know any. And if I did, I couldn't break that confidence. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you the names of members of the Oxford group. Maybe they can scare one up. They gave me 10 names. I went and I cashed one of my dollars, my $10. I got 20 nickels. Went back to the phone booth. I went through 9 numbers in a matter of about 5 minutes. They were either not home, they didn't answer, hung up on me, or they couldn't help me. Down to the last number, I fearfully dropped the nickel in, dialed the number, and I caught a man. He answered the phone, who was packing his bag, getting ready to leave town for the weekend. He was already late, and I was slowing him down more, you know. I told him what I wanted, and he said, I don't know who told you to call me. I don't know when he's drunk. I can't help you. He got ready to hang up, and he said, well, wait a minute, write this number down. He gave me the name and the number, Henrietta Seiberling, and the number out on Portage Path north of the city. And when I finished and I recognized the name, my gut hit the bottom of the telephone booth. Because Henrietta Seiberling, that's got to be Frank Seiberling's wife, the guy that started Goodyear. I knew him. When I was on top in New York in some of the clubs, he was another club member. I knew him on a first-name basis, Frank Seiberling, multi-millionaire. I can't call him up, tell him, hey, it's Bill Wilson, I'm a drunk now, do you know when you're drunk? I just couldn't do it. But the longer I sat in that booth, the more I realized if I don't, I'm dead meat in that bar. I dropped the nickel in. The woman answered. I told her who and what I was, what I wanted. She said, you get right over. You come right over. She gave me the address. I jumped in a cab. Went out to Portage Path to the Seiberling estate. I met Henrietta. Henry, we called her. She wasn't Frank's wife, first of all. And she wasn't living in the mansion. She was living at the gatehouse right by the entrance to the mansion. She only recently moved back to that house so her kids could have access to their farm. She was going through a divorce situation with her husband who was chasing some socialite back in New York. She'd only been there a short while, but she met me and she interviewed me to see if I was a drunk. Now, I've been in interviews where I tried to prove I wasn't a drunk, and here I am trying to prove. Well, she heard half of one story. She said, you'll do fine. And she went and she picked up the phone and she called Ann Smith, a friend of hers, who had a husband, a doctor, Dr. Bob Smith, who was a chronic alcoholic. And she said, Ann, get Bob over here. I got somebody that can help him. And Annie hemmed and hawed, came up with one reason after another why they couldn't come over. So finally the truth came out. She said, Henry, you know Bob. He came home this afternoon with a potted plant for me for Mother's Day. Put it on the kitchen table. As he's more potted than the plant, he's under the table. And I couldn't wake him up if his life depended on it. Find somebody else. And Henry said, no. He said to me, mister, can you come back tomorrow for dinner? I said, sure, I had nothing to do. Why not? Free dinner. I said, yeah, 5 o'clock. And 5 o'clock, no excuses. I'll see you tomorrow. I got back to the hotel, got through that day, and the next day, no problem. Actually walked out the next day out to the Cyberlink estate. It was a beautiful day. And at 5 o'clock on the dot, I met Bob Smith, the young boy Smitty, and Ann. He was a mess. And apparently on the way out, he said to Annie, he said, I'll give this mug 15 minutes. I don't need some jerk from New York to come and tell me about alcohol. He knew everything there was about alcohol. He knew it, studied it. Whatever he could find on it, he read it. Didn't help him, but he knew a lot about it. So I gave him 15 minutes. We went in to sit down to eat, and he started to shake so badly, the food was going all over the place. I took pity on him, and I asked the hostess to put our plates in the oven. We'll eat later. And they had a little room right next to the dining room with these pocket doors that opened up, and you could go in. It was a quiet reading room that Henry had to use for a quiet time. Very devout member of the Oxford. So they closed the door behind us, and Bob sat, we were knees together in this tiny room. He's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. I remember what Dr. Silkworth had told me. And I said the only honest thing I could say that day. I said, Doctor, I need your help. And he was taken aback. He said, what do you mean, need my help? I said, I'm an alcoholic. If I talk to you today, I won't get drunk. And I began to talk to him. And he began to talk to me. And the 15 minutes lasted for 6 hours. When we came out, he had his arm around me, and he wasn't shaking anymore. And he pointed like this to Annie and said, can we bring this guy home with us? I think he can help. And Annie said, sure, come on. And I begged off. I had an appointment the next morning in the library in town. I said, I can't. They wanted to drive me back to the hotel, but I was so full of cigarettes and coffee, I said, I need the exit. I got to walk back. So I walked back to the hotel. Funny thing, I've often thought about this. A block away from the hotel, I stopped under a streetlight to light a cigarette. That's when I noticed that I was shaking. And I knew something happened. A few days later, I moved in with them. And I can tell you now, the love, compassion, the beauty, the goodness of those people. I mean, it was the most hallowed home that I've ever been in my life. The love that was in that house, even with a drunken father and a drunken husband. They put me up in the boys' room. He was made to sleep in his sister with his sister. Every morning after breakfast, the three of us, Ann, myself, and Bob, would go upstairs in one of the rooms after breakfast and pray. Me praying. Read from the good book or some other good book. Meditate for a while, then share with each other. Share our lives together. It always ended after about an hour with Annie saying, faith without works is dead. And I go off to my investigation, Bob to whatever practice he had left, and Annie to the House of Children. And at night we'd go to an Oxford group meeting. And if there wasn't a meeting, we'd go for a walk. And Bob and I would talk about this little mustard seed of an idea, this little tiny mustard seed of an idea, the possibility that a recovered drunk could have a positive effect on an active drunk, helping that person, thereby helping himself or herself. Bob got sober, and it was a wonderful time to be alive. Really, truly wonderful. And then one morning he came down to breakfast and he said, listen, there's an AMA convention in Atlantic City. I've been going there 30 years drunk. I got to go there now sober to find out what's going on in my profession. Bob was a proctologist, a rectal surgeon. His reputation had gotten so bad that they used to say about him, his patients are really betting their ass when they go to him because you never know if you're going to get drunk or sober. And he knew it. He was humiliated by it, but he knew it. He said, I'm going to go study, see what's new in my field. And Annie said, don't go. And he said to me, what do you think? I got a solo. I had to go back to New York. There was nothing done illegal. I had to go find some some work to do. Well, I said, let's try it out. I'm sure he's going to be fine. Well, the way Bob told his story, he picked up his first drink as the train pulled out of Akron. We found him 5 days later. Well, actually, one of his office nurses, ex-office nurse, she found him in a bar downtown Akron, brought him home, tried to get him on his feet, but after one day they called up and said, come and get him. He's a mess. So we drove out. And on the way out, Annie began to cry. And I said, what's the matter, honey? She said, Bill, we're in trouble. Bob has a procedure in a couple of days. If he misses that, we lose the operating theater, we lose the hospital. It's the last one that allow him to practice his surgery in town. He's wiped out. We have to go back. Can you help me get him on his feet? And for her sake, not for Bob's, I said, all right. We brought him home. He was a mess. I put a cot next to his bed. And through that whole tortuous withdrawal period, it was horrible. He got well enough that on the day of the operation, I was downstairs having coffee. He came down, looked terrible. He said, Bill, I can't do this by myself. Can you drive me? I said, okay. So we jumped in the car, and he was shaking so badly, I stopped at a bar and got him a double of scotch and a bottle of beer. Calm his nerves. He was grateful. He drank it. We got to the hospital. He got out of the car, and he was walking towards the door, and I was about ready to pull out. When he turned around, he came back, and he looked in the window. He said, I'm going through with this. I said, well, go through with it. And he left, and I went home. That was 7. 10 o'clock came. We called the hospital. The operation had been performed. The patient lived, thank God. But no Bob. 12 o'clock, no Bob. And he starts calling all over town. Haven't seen him in weeks. They're lying. She said, 2 o'clock, she does the same circuit of phone calls. Hotels, clubs, bars, friends' houses. Haven't seen him. He said, Bill, they're lying. They always cover for him. Whenever he has a success, he gets drunk. So I made arrangements. That was it. I threw the towel in for the night train back to New York. This idea, one drunk help another, hogwash. At 5 o'clock, the car pulled into the driveway. I was in the cab. Annie pulled the curtains back and she said, it's Bob. I said, well, how does he look? She said, well, you really can't tell. He can hold his liquor until he's up close. So there we were standing in the parlor. We heard the key scratching the door. It opened up and he put his little bag down at a table by the door. He came up to us. For those of you that are married to us, you know that pregnant pause where you try to figure out who's going to throw the first brick. And it was Annie. But with a very plaintive voice, all she said is, honey, where have you been? We've been worried sick. Where have you been? Where had he been? He'd been all over the city of Akron, meeting with everybody and anybody that he had ever harmed or owed money to. Made amends, made promises to pay them back, telling each and every one of them that he was an alcoholic for the first time out of his life. Before that, he was a secret drinker. And that's what he meant when he said, I'm going to go through it. He was going through one of those steps that up until then, really we'd only been talking about. And that was the 10th of June, 1935. That was his last drink. Today he died 15 years later. And I didn't go home. I stayed. And the next morning he came down and he said, you know, Willie, you and I aren't going to stay sober. Talking to each other. Can you stick around long enough for me to capture a drunk and then you go back to New York and find one of your own? I said, yeah, sure. So where are you going to find one? It's easy. Watch. He picked up the phone. He called the Akron hospital and said, this is Dr. Smith. I have a friend here that can help people get off liquor. Is there anybody down here that needs his assistance? And the nurse said, what about you, Doc? He said, well, he had. Are you sober? Yeah, well, that's good enough for me. We got a guy right now in restraints, just blacking the eyes of the head nurse. Going to be committed to the Ohio State Hospital for the criminally insane. Will he do? And Smitty said, yeah, give him some sedatives, he'll be down by and by. And without my knowing it, Bob had made arrangements to have him taken out of the ward and put in a private room so he could speak to him in confidence at Bob's expense. So I got to set the scene. 1935, when you're in a private room in a hospital and you can't afford it, and you're strapped in bed, you're convinced you're dying. And as far as he was concerned, when Bob and I walked into that room, we were the undertakers come to measure the body with the coffin. He was terrified. And like a jerk, I walk up to him and I look down at him. He's strapped in bed, hands and feet. I said, "Mister, do you have a minute?" "Are you kidding me? Where am I going?" What a stupid question. Well, anyway, we talked. I told him my story. Bob, for the first time, told him his story. And little by little, when he began to realize that he wasn't going to die, he wasn't going to be buried, he began to sweat less. His eyes went back into his head. He got some color in his cheeks. He listened to us. Now, this guy was a lawyer. He was on the town council at one time, and he was the Sunday school superintendent for that county. What a prize. If we could get him to join us, wow. We put him on the cover of Life magazine. Oh, this is going to be great. So I said to him, "Well, you heard our story. You want to join us?" He said, "No. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming here, but I'm a con. I dare not leave here. I'll kill somebody on my next run. There's so much rage inside. I don't know where it came from, but I can drink it. I get full of rage. I asked to be committed. I know I'll kill somebody. Thanks, but no thanks." So we turned to go, and honestly, God, to this day, I don't know if it was me or Bob, one of us was back there. We said, "Mister, can we come back and see you again? Maybe we missed something. Maybe we screwed up something. Can we come back and talk to you?" "Oh, please do," he said. "You know how lonely this drying out is. They hate us here. They hate the sight of us, the sound of us, the smell of us. They don't come near you 1 minute of the day. Oh, please come back. It's just for the company. We had half a sale. We'll take it." A couple days later, we get back. Now he's out of the private room. He's back in the ward. And if I remember, it was either 6 or 5. I can never recall. 5 beds on each side, or 6 beds. But he was in the last bed on the right-hand side. Nurse's station's in the middle, looking out the only window in the ward. He's sitting up on the edge of the bed, looking out the window. His Johnny's wide open. He's mooning the whole hospital, all right, sitting up there. His poor wife's on a chair next to the bed. She sees us walking in, and he turns to see what she's looking at. As we're walking down the aisle to him, he lets out a scream. "There they are!" Screamed at the top of his lungs. The nurse dropped the tray. I think the guy next to him had just died, got up and went home, walked out. He woke the dead. It was absolutely screaming. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a dream. Then he starts jumping up and down, and then Johnny's going up, and he's exposing himself to the hospital. His wife's terrified that he slipped his noggin, and he's screaming away. "It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a dream." We get down to him. We're calming him down. And finally, he says to his wife, "Honey, listen to these guys." This guy pointed to me. He's a stockbroker from New York. He's an alcoholic. This other guy is a Heine doctor right here in this hospital. Talk to him. Bob, there was a hole there. He would have dove into the hole. He was so embarrassed. So we started to tell the story, and all the while he's saying, "I thought it was a dream. I thought it was a dream." We finished. He said, "Honey, find where they put my clothes. I want to go home. If they can do it, I believe I can." And the name was Bill Dotson, AA number 3. We had our first group that still meets today. And that was the beginning. 2 years later, we had 40 men. So, Akron, Cleveland, New York, one poor soul down in Philadelphia all by himself. So, 40 men. I happened to be in Akron on business. After the meeting, the Akron, Oxford group meeting, went back to Bob's house. 6 months was the criteria. We listed 40 names. Bob dropped the pencil on the paper, on the pad on the table, and said, "Bill, at the rate we're going, we'll have 1,000 by the year 2000. We need to kick this out of retail into wholesale. Take this list back to New York. Show it to your friends on Wall Street. Get them to invest in us, and we'll open up 40 hospitals, put a drunk in each hospital. They can teach the staff how to get sober, and we'll get this thing rolling." Good idea. We're back to New York. Showed my friends what we were doing. They told me to go to hell. Crazy. We'd give a bunch bunch of drunks, money out. I mean, the depression was over. There was money back in the street, but there was no money for a bunch of drunks. I couldn't sell anybody at all. See, we had those 5 ideas that we got from the Oxford, which I should explain. You know, the Oxford group was not a religion. It was a non-denominational evangelical movement. If you belong to a church, go to church, but come to these meetings, much like ours. They were like early Christians. No rules, no regulations, just comforting each other. No fellowship like we had. We had their 5 suggestions that Eddie passed on to me. We invented our first AA step, which is that we're powerless over liquor, that it made our lives unmanageable. That was our 6 steps that we had. 6 ideas. We didn't call them steps. So I couldn't get anybody to invest in me, and it gave me kicked in an ulcer. I went to see my brother-in-law, the doctor, and he asked me what I was up to. I told him. He just, out of the blue, said, you know, I was a camp counselor with a girl whose father is Rockefeller's closest associate. I jumped off the table, grabbed him by the throat, and I said, find her. Give me a chance to talk to that guy. Which he did. I told him what I was doing. Rockefeller was really against drinking. He's the guy that started Prohibition. So anything that would help stop it. Primitive Baptist, lovely man. He said, listen, check these guys out. So they actually went out and interviewed all 40 drunks. They came back, and the associate, my son-in-law's girlfriend's father, he wrote the report of what they found with these 40 drunks. Myself, we were all interviewed. And they gave the report to Mr. Rockefeller, and his associate stood over his desk while he read it. And we needed money. We were broke. And Rockefeller read it and said, this is absolutely perfect. Absolutely. But I beg you, please, don't ask me to give these guys money. It'll kill it. Kill it then. We're that close to the brass ring when this was over. No money. But the last meeting with the foundation people, Rockefeller Foundation, one of the lads said, you want to make a lot of money? Write a book. They'll sell millions of them. You got the cure for the worst curse of mankind. Write a book. This book over here. So, on that evidence from this guy who was a big shot, we raised $5,000 among ourselves, sold our trusts, jewelry, borrowed money to buy stock, and formed a publishing company. Works Publishing, after Andy, Faith Without Works is dead. We bought a publishing company. Only an alcoholic will open a publishing company without a book. We had no book. So I wrote a story, my story. Bob wrote his story. Dr. Bob shared an opinion. Dr. Silver shared an opinion. 40 drunks wrote their stories. Some reporters were helping them up in Cleveland, shape the stories up. And we had a book. The only thing missing was a little part in the middle, how it works. We didn't have a book. We had those ideas, but we didn't know how it worked. And this is a how-to book, so you can't have a how-to without how it works. We were stuck. We didn't know. When people say to me, hey, how does this thing work? I say, it works fine. What else do you need to say? It works fine. That won't do for a how-to book. One night, back in Brooklyn, we had broken away in New York from the Oxford. We made it easier for Catholics and Jews to come into the fellowship. So we had broken away. And we're now meeting not with them, but in our own homes. This night happened to be my brother-in-law's house, my home. We're sitting around talking to be good enough for us. Coming out of the room, a couple of fellows were back drinking Lois's coffee. And I read to them for the first time the 12 steps of our program. And I said, fellas, we got to send this to the printer. We can't wait. We're broke. And Jim B., the atheist from Philly, got up and said, I got one suggestion. I was ready for a fist fight. He said, can you, whenever you do mention the word God, add as we understand it? Not your understanding and not his understanding. It's how we come to that realization. Well, I said, okay, we added that. We made a few more changes over the couple of weeks. The only thing missing was a name. What do we call the book? In modesty, humility, I suggested the Bill Wilson movement. I mean, go figure, They said no. Imagine that. Then I was going to call it The Way Out, because there were, it just sounded right, The Way Out. But there were already 11 titles of The Way Out. We didn't want to be, there's 12, I'm sorry, confused. We didn't want to be number 13, so we canceled that. Then we were going to call it 100 Men. There were 100 men sober that year. And thank God the first woman qualified 6 months prior. You couldn't say 100 men plus this woman over here, you know, so went back to the drawing board. Now one night they carried a fellow in from Bellevue who was dying. We didn't know it. Joe Worth. He was helped get the New Yorker magazine started. Brilliant guy. They carried him. He was very ill. And we used to refer to ourselves. We were with the Oxford group. We were the alcoholic squad of the Oxford. We were on our own. We became an unknown bunch of drunks. That was what we called ourselves. And somehow Joe picked up on that because he began to babble. Anonymous alcoholic. Anonymous alcoholic. Finally got too loud. They scooped him, brought him back to the hospital. He died not too long after that. But that stayed in the room. Anonymous alcoholic. Sounds pretty good. We called Akron. They said, call it anything. We need the book. You see, up until then, if somebody wrote in, somebody had to go visit him. Now we can send a book. A lot easier. Then if they followed up, we could follow up on that. So they said, we need books. Call it anything you want. And then we thought, okay, anonymous alcoholics. Then at the last minute, one fellow said, put the alcoholics first. Call it Alcoholics Anonymous. So I called up the printer. And I said, the title of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, is that all? Is that all you want to call it? That's all you want on the cover? Alcoholics Anonymous? Not by anybody? I said, yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous, period. When you know, he put the period right in the middle of the book. Wise guy. We printed we had one piece of mischief left, and it's my fault more than anybody else's. We were going to sell this for $3.50 in 1939. That was a king's ransom. A lot of money. Book. So we decided to make it look, it was worth $3.50. So we printed it on very thick paper. We made it sort of like a textbook size. And we printed 5,000 copies. That's why you call it the big book, by the way. This is the copy of this book, and not the original. But we printed 5,000 copies. We sold 102. The girl bought 2. We couldn't give it away. But that's another night. It's another story. I have a train to catch and a friend to bury. Suffice it to say that the book is only a suggestion. We don't have all the answers. God will let you know what you have to do. Just ask him in the morning when you say your prayers, how can I help the man or the woman who is still sick and suffering? And you'll get your answer. Only if you have your own house in order. It's obvious you can't translate or transmit something you don't have. Remember me the first 5 months? After knocking on noggins and not getting anywhere? You can't give away what you don't have. See to it that your relationship with your higher power is right. Great things will happen to you. That's the great fact. That's the magnificent reality of the here. We, the dregs of sobriety, can help dregs of society, can help other people. What a shame. We're able to help other people. Your house has to be in order. We have a very simple process. Abandon yourself to God and your understanding. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find, and have a full, absolutely beautiful life. AA and utter simplicity, wrapped up in a mystery that nobody, least of all me, understands perfectly. Our strength comes from our weakness. The fact that we are what we are. We're alcoholics. If you know that, and you own that, you can't be beaten. It's very simple. Just stick with it. Humility before resurrection. And pain. Pain is the touchstone of any spiritual rebirth. The pain of going through the 12 suggested program. 12 suggested steps of our program. But we make that easy because we tell you don't do it by yourself. Get some help. Do it with somebody. I'll be getting to preach to the choir, so it's time to wrap it up. This group is celebrating its first anniversary. Congratulations. It's wonderful. A year of sobriety is absolutely splendid. But I beg you, don't depend upon that for the needs of today. The art of life, believe me, is to take it a day at a time. One day at a time. You know, I'm grateful for one thing. I was with Bob last Sunday. We spent the day together going over some business that you'll hear more about in the springtime, about the organization of AA. And although he was sick and he had the operation on Tuesday to look forward to, I had all of his attention and you had all of his love. It was a good meeting. Finally, the time came for me to leave, and I got off the sofa, was saying goodbye, and said, "Wait a minute, Bill, let me walk you to the door." And I eased him up out of the sofa, and me leaning on him, and leaning on me, we went over to the front door, and again I was saying goodbye, and he said, "Wait a minute, pal, 1 minute." He went over to the hall closet, and he took down this old Irish country hat, plopped it on my head, and he said, "It's raining outside. I don't want you to get sick. You've got too much work to do." And then he gave me a hug, which between the two of us, very unusual. We're not hugging. And I left. And I'm walking down the path to the taxi to take me to the train station, when I turned around for whatever reason to look at the house again. And he had managed to come out on the porch, and he had his hand raised. And I said, "Is he blessing me?" And he just waved like this. He said, "Hey, Bill, don't louse this up. Keep it simple." My God, he's been saying that to me for years. Keep it simple. Here was my partner for 15 years, a man I never had a hard word with. Never. That was, no other man had that benefit, but he and I never had a hard word for each other. You know, they say of the two of us that Bob's role in this was not that important. Never to me. I've just heard this junk every once in a while. That I am the heart of AA. My God, if they only knew, if I'm the heart, he's the soul. The blood of my heart. So I turned away, little realizing it was going to be the last time I would see him alive. And I didn't know it. Had I known it, I wouldn't have left Akron. I would have stayed for the operation until today. But I didn't know it. And then tonight, when I was coming here and I reached up into my hall closet and took this hat down, I remember that brief period with him. And that's when I realized I didn't know what he did. You see, it wasn't raining. He had just found a lovely way to say goodbye. And in so doing, teach me, what this is all about. It's nothing more than one person passing something on to another. Some strength you might have, some experience you might have, some hope. I pray it lasts forever. Thank you. Good night. God bless you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you for coming out on a hot night. My name is Bill McNiff. I had an exit interview in a Boston hospital 43 years ago. Insane asylum. My shrink gave me a prescription blank. It said AA. He tore it off and he handed it to me. He said, "Here, Bill, save your ass, your soul will follow." Well, I found my ass and then some. I'm still looking for my soul, but it was the greatest experience of my life. I wrote this in 1988, 87, 88. First showing was 1989. I've been all over the world. It was written for men and women in prison. That's what it was for. And it just grew to this. I've been all over the world, like I said, it's a great joy of my life. I'm able to travel, see friends, revisit old friends. But I do it for prison. We were in a prison the other night, the DUI prison. They had 200 men come. Most of them illiterates. We bring them these books. This is a mini big book. It doesn't have the stories in it. I'm grateful for it. But I do it for them. That's where my joy comes. And they get, you never know. I've yet to meet one of those guys outside. I hope they make it someday. But they all love this story at the end of it. They come up and say, some unfortunately think I'm Bill Wilson when I'm doing it. They come up and say, "Please tell Bob's wife who passed away, please tell her that we're sorry for the loss." Well, that's okay. I don't correct them. but it's a great joy. We buy these books for dirt. But when I do this play, don't worry, this crowd's not big. I ask for people to put some money in Bob's hat before they leave the coin. So it costs us $1.25. We buy them by the thousand. We get them for 89 cents. But by the time we pay the freight, it's a little bit over $1. And then we mail them out to anybody who requests it. We give them out in prison. Otherwise, if you would, or if there's anybody here who wants to do this, I'll give you the script. Spend a couple of days, you can do it. Because I'm almost 80. I started when I was 55, so you can imagine I haven't got that many legs left. So tonight, though, if you would, say a prayer that this continues to be seen by the people that need it the most, those people in prison. My greatest performance of this play was done in a prison in Owen Sound, Canada, to 4 men in a locked cell. 2 illiterates that were native Canadians, addicted to gasoline, huffing. The other 2 full-blown alcoholics that couldn't read. And this was the big book. And it was the most joyous experience of my life. So if somebody wants to do this, it'll happen to you too. I even think a girl can do it if they want to. Get up and tell this story from a different point of view. So thank you for coming. God bless you and have a safe drive. Those are the prescription blanks that Bob used to give out to his patients that you got anything. Treasure. And that prayer was on his desk for years. Thank you and good night. God bless you.